Hi guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another video on Conqueror's Blade. So, we are going back to the Iron Reapers. Not necessarily any particularly good reason why, but there was that survey that was recently conducted about which unit people would most like to see buffed, and Iron Reapers actually topped the list. So it kind of made me want to revisit them a little bit and see kind of why that is, and what maybe would be some good improvements to them to actually make them a better unit, because in fact I would say that I do actually by and large agree with people. They are a unit that needs a little bit of a buff in some areas. So for those of you who have been in the game a tremendously long time, then you'll remember Iron Reapers used to be the absolute dominant tier 5 unit. Well, they were the only tier 5 infantry unit, but their charge used to sort of wipe through 60, 70 units in one go and be absolutely demolishing, and nothing could really stop them. They had even higher defenses than they currently do already, and yeah, they were a really amazing unit. They then went through a series of nerfs over a few seasons, and they've really got to a place now where, particularly with combination of the nerfs and where the meta has gone with new units being introduced, that they are kind of a unit that realistically isn't very effective in the current meta. So what is it about them that really kind of lets them down? I think their charge is actually okay. They do a really decent amount of damage. They have like a sweeping arc hit. So actually, I find in the right situation, you can take out quite a few units with the charge, and it does it quite well. I think the problem comes with the actual AI control and the attack speed. So their attack speed is incredibly low with the flail. You can to some extent negate this with X and V, and that does kind of work. When you X them forwards and then press V, they kind of reset and attack again, so you can slightly force them to attack, but this gets a bit harder once you get into big melee fights. In smaller situations or skirmishes, then it's a little bit easier to control them in that way. I find it a bit more difficult on the bigger fights, and realistically, it kind of shouldn't really work like that either. On top of that, I think the AI is really, really bad on them. I often find that they stand the wrong way, look at an enemy unit. Every time they think about attacking an enemy unit, the enemy unit's dead, moved, or killed them. And so they're just so, I don't know, the AI control just seems really bad on them. I would like to see them perhaps get slightly increased damage, not so much necessarily on the charge, but in their attack, or an increased attack speed, and most definitely a little bit of a intelligence buff. If they had a slightly higher than the 1 IQ point that they seem to have, I think they would be a really decent unit. Obviously, defensively, they're pretty good. That 1200 piercing defense isn't bad. When combined with the 1260 health, it makes them a really tanky unit. But there is only 16 of them, and it's 320 leadership, so you do kind of have to weigh that up a little bit. Doctrine-wise, I've not got anything particularly great on them. I was actually thinking about grabbing like one of the epic blunt damage doctrines out the box and throwing that on just to give them that increased blunt damage. But other than that, I've got a little bit of extra piercing defense, and then just the blunt damage and blunt AP, as well as the extra damage to units and the extra damage to heroes, because these guys do actually do quite a good job of killing enemy heroes, particularly on the charge, as we'll see in some of the clips we've got later on. But yeah, I think that's about all I've really got to say on them. Of course, they are a little bit expensive to maintain. They are a golden era unit, so you're going to be paying 12,400 bronze per unit kit, which is a little on the expensive side. So let's hop into some battles with them, see how we get on, and see what we can do. So we kick things off on the new Viking Siege map, although probably shouldn't really be calling it the new map anymore, since it's pretty much the end of the season. But we are coming up towards the sea point. Got a unit of Fortebrachos in front of us, just go straight for the charge. And this is where Reapers, in my opinion, do well. They have a very decent charge. We push straight up, it just clears straight through the unit without any issues at all, and we're thrown on. We take a little bit of damage, lose one of the units, but generally, they're very good at that sort of thing. Don't quite know why I didn't even try and go for that Nadachi, but hey ho. We just go down, finish off clearing the sea point, get the cap, and then we're kind of, deciding what we want to do next if we want to be pushing onto the base point. So yeah, charging, I think the Iron Reapers do really well, but it's just the AI in normal combat, which is just absolutely abysmal. So we start to push the unit forwards, they get stuck into some of these javelins, they can kind of do a little bit, but they don't really do very well in this sort of combat. And look how, you see that unit comes through, look at the delay on some of them swinging. Some of the units swing 1 or 2 seconds after that spear had been carried through the unit. It just shows how delayed the AI is on this unit, or how bad the AI is. But no other units seem to have such abysmal AI. I don't know if it's just down to their extremely slow attack speed, but it just doesn't seem to work at all. We go into some of these condos. Again, just stood like this, we're not doing much, but I'm just watching those Serigs in the corner. I think they're going to charge in a minute, particularly into these range units. My job to try and protect them. We countercharge them, flattens the entire unit in one charge, gets the hero kill, almost instant. And that's what this unit is absolutely all about. You know, they're just absolutely perfect in this sort of situation on that charge. We unfortunately get a bit overwhelmed, then we start to get driven back. Most of the team falls back, get overwhelmed, get flattened, and get myself killed. But still, kind of shows what the unit is like on the charge. So we then end up on Conqueror City, a map that actually doesn't really seem to come into the rotation very often. But the enemy are trying to push our supply point from the back. Initially, I'm not quite sure what I want to do. I didn't necessarily want to charge into all that lot. I'm sort of hanging around a bit. We've got these fortebrasses at the top. But actually, as we start to get set up, I notice there's a few friendly heroes down the bottom starting to push from them in the back. So I see our time to support the team is now. So I start to pull up, get the unit set up, go for the charge, go for the damage buff with the glaive. And of course, it just goes straight through. And of course, does exactly what you want the Iron Reapers to do. Get a bunch of kills on the charge. Does enough damage that with the rest of the team support, you know, we can easily wipe through that enemy push. We did lose 2 models, but again, on the charge, Iron Reapers really seeming to do quite well. So pull them back to the supply point, start to get them healed up, because then we can then push on and start to look for some other parts later on in the battle. 2 minutes later on the same fight, they're actually starting to push the main base point. Wasn't necessarily really that thoughtful charge here. I just wanted to get in and do what I can to try and save the base, because quite a lot of enemy heroes here and not a lot of friendly support. So I'm just coming around, get straight up for the charge, go straight for the charge, and actually they get a bunch of kills. They almost get 30-40 kills on that charge. And then they just sort of start laying about them. And they seem to do better almost in larger group fights like this. Because the AI I find is so bad, when you're fighting small numbers of units, they sort of seem unable to aim, but when they're just sort of swinging in this AoE arc in a large cluster, they seem to work, well, quite a bit better because, well, they're not really got to aim at anything specific. They're just swinging and flailing wildly about them, and yeah, that seems to work almost better, in my opinion, than trying to fight smaller numbers of units. And of course, it wouldn't be an Iron Reaper video without trying to flatten as many heroes as you can in one charge. And these few heroes did nicely oblige, as we flattened the unit of stalwarts as well. And that sort of thing. They do kill heroes quite effectively. It always surprises me, but they do it quite well. Unfortunately, a unit of Laos turned up and did slightly ruin my day. But still, we were able to give them a little bit of a run for the money, and we were still able to get out with sort of about half the unit or something like that and get them back to the supply point and heal up. And so that really sums up a lot of my feelings on Iron Reapers. They have a lot of negatives. They are painfully slow. The armour isn't as good as you really would expect it to be, and their hand-to-hand outside of their charge is just painfully frustrating. You can get around it to some extent with good use of X and V, you know, moving the unit, resetting their attack, kind of makes them attack a little bit more regularly, and on sort of some fights that can work quite well, but it can also be pretty painful to use sometimes, and it just doesn't always quite seem to pan out how you want it. And I'm always forever finding that I'm turning up to the fight a few minutes late because the unit's just so goddamn slow. On the positives, their charge is really quite nice. It does do a lot of damage, particularly when you're charging into larger groups and they all get their sort of AoE swing off. Then they do a tremendous amount of damage in that swing, and it is really quite effective. They do get a nice little self-heal, but it's not, it's not game-changing by any stretch of the imagination. So that's really been my experience with them so far. I would like to see them get a bit of a buff, particularly to their sort of, standard melee capabilities, because their attack speed is just so slow, and the AI ability on them is just so bad that it makes them fairly frustrating to play, or at least in my experience. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel for a lot more Conqueror Blade content, and I shall see you guys all on the next video.